Hello, and welcome to the Still Standing podcast. This is a new podcast, so I would love it if you would subscribe and like and comment below and share it with your friends. Magic is real, and if you don't, that's exciting too. Uh, Thank you so much for being here. I am very honored to have with me today Sam Morris. He is the founder of Zen Warrior Training, and I'm just going to read a little bit about from his bio, but then I'm going to turn it over to Sam to tell us about Zen Warrior Training and his journey to what he's doing now from a challenging situation. So, in his own words, Sam says, "My journey towards true enlightenment began unexpectedly in 1999 during a period of immense personal adversity. A life-altering car accident caused by a drunk driver resulted in a complete loss of mobility from the waist down. This devastating event, followed by prolonged periods of hospitalization spanning over 2 years, marked the dawn of my transformation. Refusing to be defined by my circumstances, I chose to cultivate my spirit as a warrior. I fought relentlessly against the inner voices of despair, counteracting the pain and challenges with unwavering resolve. Through this internal battle, I honed my ability to tap into the powerful, unseen potential within me. My resilience and growth sparked curiosity and admiration, and soon high achieving individuals sought my guidance to unlock their own hidden potential." Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you, Shannon. It's so nice to meet you as well. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, I'd love to start by you sharing what is Zen Warrior Training all about?
Zen warrior training is about taking our perspective on life to the outer limits of what is possible. I've always been kind of an outer limits guy for my entire life, and always wanted to know really what's beneath this human experience. What is really going on here? And that fascination, that curiosity, recognizing that our inner lives are such an extraordinary and endlessly interesting thing to experience and to evolve around. And that there is an art, really an art and a science to inner exploration that to me far surpasses in its interest anything related to any particular type of accomplishment, even though when one is also connected to that inner experience, one can absolutely accomplish great things in the world. But rather than looking from the outside in, the way that I find a lot of people do with respect to looking at outside goals, looking at outside ideas and perspectives on what a good or well lived human being should sort of adhere to, instead focusing on the inner journey and recognizing how much is possible through doing so.
That is so beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. I'd
Mhm.
also love to know about your background and your life. Who are you? And just tell me about yourself.
Yeah, I grew up on an organic blueberry farm in Maine and had a strong connection with nature from childhood. And I think that that really, in many respects, informed my values in life and also my mindset as well. Um, I'm so glad in hindsight that I had this connection to nature, because it's a no bullshit type of experience. When it's just you and nature, there is no bullshit. There is no cultural noise. There is no manipulation, lies, propaganda, all of the things that we are so accustomed to experiencing inside of our culture was absent when you're just connected to nature. And I still feel that nature is the primary place for connection. And the Taoists always recognized that nature holds the answers, that it has, Tao literally meaning the way, that nature communicates the way through it, and that communicates through human beings as well. And from my early childhood, I had that as a foundational experience for moving forward. Um, and then my teens, I started to explore through psychedelics, expanded states of consciousness and what was possible when one entered a non-ordinary space. And now, of course, psychedelics are the latest trend, and it's like everyone is using psychedelics these days, for better or for worse. Um, and then when in 1999, I was in a car wreck caused by a drunk driver, and I became paraplegic. And that was a real game changer for me in so many respects, because I had to get used to going from being a 24-year-old, extremely able bodied adult to, in some ways, feeling like a kid again in a totally new body and experiencing life through a very different lens. And that lens, um, as traumatic as it was, and it certainly was very traumatic. I subsequently spent over 2 years hospitalized, completely incapable of doing anything for myself. And that was incredibly challenging for me to go through. And I also recognized, looking back in hindsight, I recognized just how valuable that experience was, in that it really helped me to learn how to not identify with the circumstances of my life, but recognize that there is a deeper self that is deeper than the circumstances, deeper than the autobiography, that we can all connect to, that we all have access to. And so that continues to inform every day of my life, and also inform the nature of the work that I do with my clients to help them move through their own metaphorical paralysis, which everyone has to some degree or another.
Yeah, that after a life-altering incident like that, especially, I mean, for anyone, but especially someone who's so active and so athletic and so involved physically in this world, I think that's such an interesting thing. I'm a spiritual person, so, and I know you are too, so it definitely, there's a lot underneath that, but it is having to, I've always thought about that, like, if I lost one of my senses, or when it, or my ability to move in a certain way that I'm used to, how would I relearn to appreciate life, like, as you said, from a different perspective? And so I'd love to hear about, I know it's a years long journey, but how do you go from, I'm assuming, feeling sorry for yourself and being very frustrated and upset and distressed, to acceptance, surrender, and then embracing?
Yeah, yeah. It's a day-to-day thing, and it, in many respects, it still is. I have a permanent condition now, as far as I know. It could and may very well last the rest of my lifetime, that I'm paraplegic. That comes with it comes with its there's some challenges that come with that territory. I guess that's the best way of putting it. Um, Physical challenges that I have to deal with on a daily basis, energetic challenges. In order for me to really be a high performing adult, I have to take very good care of myself, extra good care of myself, given the fact that I also am paralyzed from the waist down, and pain, discomfort, wounds, all kinds of stuff on a regular basis. And I would say it's not so much something that has a neat and tidy sort of, you overcome the thing and then you're on the other side of it and you look back and it's like, oh, I put a nice little bow on that and now I'm all good to go. It's really, to me, it's a daily thing in so many respects, and I just get used to it, just in the same way that, um, when you work out, you build muscle and you get used to building muscle, or when you eat a certain way, you get used to a certain diet, you get used to putting certain foods and nutrients into your body. And in a similar way, I have gotten used to dealing with extraordinary adversity in a way that it has become so habitual that I sometimes don't even notice that I'm doing it anymore. It's really about the practice of doing it on a day-to-day basis. At least that's been my experience. And I think that that's something that fails to reach a lot of people because we kind of have this notion that we are these static identities, that we are this egoic sense of self with a particular autobiography. And this is just kind of the way things are. And we habituate around certain ways of thinking and feeling and behaviors that sort of create a limiting construct. And I'm just so used to noticing the limitations and working with them on a day-to-day basis that it's become pretty fluid for me.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all to some degree relate to that regardless of which challenges we've experienced. There's a point at which you just go, "Okay, well, this is the way it is." I remember reading it was an Alan Watts, book. Maybe it's Buddhism Plain and Simple, I can't remember if that's his, but where I remember it made such it had such an effect on me because and this was just it was like a breakup, and I was just so bummed about it, and I came to this chapter where it said, "Just sit and say, 'This is what's happening right now. This is what's happening right now. This is just what's happening right now.'" And I've used it ever since where I was like, "Okay, this is what I got to work with." And, it kinda helps you go, "All right, well, so if this is the way it is, how can I just how can I push forward? How can I move forward with what I've got?" So I in your bio, and you talked about, like, you kinda went from despair to, "No, I'm not gonna be a victim. I'm gonna be a warrior."
Mm-hmm.
And again, however you wanna answer that, it's a huge question, but how did what helped you make that decision? And also, how has what you've been through helped you to help other people? How do you help your clients with the knowledge that you've learned?
Yeah, I would say the greatest despair for me probably was when I was hospitalized for prolonged periods of time. And particularly, this happened multiple times over the years, um, especially between 2002 and 2014. The longest time period that I was ever hospitalized and completely incapable of doing anything for myself was 7.5 months in 2003. And that was on the tail end of another 4 months in 2002. And so it was close to a year over the course of about 16 months that I was hospitalized. And the it's almost like despair. It's almost like despair isn't even a good enough word. It was like this. I kind of had to shut down in many respects. I had to shut down. I had to even stop paying attention to the passage of time because not knowing when I was going to be released from the hospital, um, if I was comparing where I was with some expectation of being able to be released, I would have driven myself crazy. So I had to literally ignore the passing of time, the passing of days, even the passing of weeks, kind of. I had no idea when it was or really who I was, other than just a body lying in bed with no ability to work, no ability to really to care for myself, no ability to do anything. And it was in many respects, I feel like worse than being in prison because at least in a prison you can move around, you can go out to the prison yard, you can, that kind of thing. This was a prison beyond a prison.
Yeah.
And what I had to really do is to really focus on basically exactly something just like what you were just describing, where it was like, well, this is just what's happening. This is just what's happening. And really trying to cultivate that meditative quality of recognizing all of those thoughts and feelings that were primarily distraught and bored and frustrated and sad and all of that, and just recognize all of that happening and try to meditate through all of it. And that's really, I suppose, meditation and movement practices and breath work, the embodiment practices is really what it comes down to. Uh, because at the end of the day, no matter what the circumstances are, the only thing that's going to be creating that sense of conflict with what is happening is the thoughts in our heads and the feelings that they correspond with. And if you can get beyond the thoughts in the head and then the feelings that they correspond with by going into a deep enough meditation so that you're in the fullness of the body and its greater connection, then the thoughts start to have less of an impact and the feelings start to have less of an impact. And so it's a lot of it's really been just like what you described, just a practicing noticing what's happening and allowing for it to happen and learning to surrender to what is happening versus be in a fight with my circumstances. So that's been the key to moving through all of the despair and frustration is that regular moment by moment by moment practice of being with what is without being in conflict with it.
Right, which is a very Buddhist principle about the more you fight your circumstances, the more you're going to suffer.
That's right.
And it doesn't mean roll over and die and just give up, but it means, okay, you have to surrender, even just when we're in emotional pain.
That's
I
right.
do a practice where I'm like, okay, this really hurts. I'm crying. I feel, and instead of tumbling down like I used to do before I went through 12-step recovery, uh, I now kind of just sit with it and say, okay, what is this feeling? What are the sensations in my body? I have a
Mm.
knot in my stomach. My throat feels tight. I feel sad. Is it going to kill me? No. It's uncomfortable. It feels when we say we're in pain, it feels like, oh, I can't survive this. But it's like, yes, I can. I can survive this. It's uncomfortable. I just have to breathe through it. I mean, there's nothing I can do to change the circumstance. So I have to sort of embrace the pain in a strange way. I don't know if that resonates with you, but it's like,
No, that's
yeah,
absolutely resonant, 100% resonant. And also something that I'm hearing you say too, which is so true, is the power of inquiry. Like, what is this? Who is it who feels the pain? Who is it that thinks that I shouldn't be experiencing this pain? You know, those that's really the nature of contemplation. It's not contemplation is not so much taking a theme to mull over in the mind, but a real inquiry into who is or what is it that is experiencing pain? What is it? Who is it that is experiencing these thoughts? And that's really that is the gateway to the recognition of the true self is that inquiry. So I love that you just framed it that way because that really is such an important part. We take for granted the fact that we believe that who we are is the thoughts that we think in our head.
yeah, who's the observer of the thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. And I also think that's why so many people do turn to spirituality. And I don't mean it as the opiate of the people, but literally it's a beautiful place to land regardless of what your beliefs are. It's sort of getting in touch with, okay, well, the human is this, I'm in this body. I can't leave this body. So perhaps I can get more in touch with my soul self and realize that my soul self is expansive. So we might feel trapped, but we really aren't because we can really connect with the greater oneness
Well
and
said. Yeah.
connection.
Well said. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is everything that the Buddha taught, that the conditions of life create suffering
Hmm.
and that there is a way beyond suffering. And essentially, that is to transcend the personal mind. That's essentially
Yeah.
what it's all about in a nutshell. That
And
we are all going to experience suffering and we can all transcend it by expanding beyond the personal mind, by getting beyond the me, my, I, related to every experience, and recognizing that there's something else there that is true presence.
Yeah. True presence and connection too, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I'm a big connection person. So even just the
Absolutely.
fact that we're still able to connect on this I mean, whether we're in separate bodies, we're not separate. We're actually part of a whole. And so I'm you, you are me. And if you hurt me, you hurt yourself and that kind of thing. So I think it's really beautiful that we can kind of lean into those connections we have with other people and how important that is. So I'd love to hear that too about the power of your support system, what kind of a support system you did have, that you do have, and how has that contributed to your healing?
Yeah, it's evolved a lot over the years. Um, I grew up with pretty strong family support, which I'm eternally grateful for. Um, when I moved out to Los Angeles in 2001, I didn't know anyone, and I was fresh out of becoming paraplegic. I'd only become paraplegic about a year before, maybe a year and a half. That was really challenging for me because LA is a place that does not really support connection. You have to look for it and
Mhm.
work for it inside of LA, as I know you know from having lived there. It's not just going to happen organically. At least that was my experience.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I did know one person out there who was why I moved out, a woman named Emily Conrad, who created a program called Continuum Movement, which is an extraordinary embodiment program. And I worked with Emily to really reconnect with myself after my spinal cord injury with the goal of becoming able bodied again. She was one of the only people on the planet who had had any success in helping some individuals with paralysis to recover function in their bodies. And so that was my goal, and that didn't end up happening, but I did end up developing a much deeper somatic connection and a practice that I could reliably use on a regular basis to be able to connect into the body, into the inner world. And so much of that connection work and practice continues to inform my life to this day. But later on, many years later, I developed much more of a strong community and became part of entrepreneurial communities and personal growth communities and movement communities focused on the relationship between movement and psychology. So I immersed myself in various communities, especially starting in 2012. I really had a big shift with respect to connecting to a lot of people who are also on a personal growth path and a professional growth path as well. And that's made a world of difference. And so now, in 2024, I'm so well connected with so many people. I almost have the opposite problem
Yeah.
of
Me
being
too.
overly connected. Sometimes it feels like, and I love it. It's a really good problem to have. I hear all the stories about, especially with men having no close men in their lives, and it's devastating, and I can't imagine what that would be like. I've had excuse me, a period of my life where I could relate to that, but it's we need each other, and we need to it's crucial in our healing process. And I'm sure through your AA process, you also, or 12 step, I don't know if it was AA, you mentioned
Yeah.
12 step. Whatever that 12-step process has been, I'm sure that connections with
Mm.
others, has been, and I would imagine probably
Yep.
crucial to your own development. Would you say?
Yes, yes, and, yeah, I was gonna say about LA too, because anyone listening that's been there or lives there, the first 10 years I was like, "I'm leaving, I'm getting out of here eventually, I'll get out of here once this happens, once that happens," and I ended up staying for 25 years because I found a tribe. I live in Arizona now, and now I go there, I spend at least a week, a month there every month
Mhm.
because It was my 12-step community, and I talk about it here. It was sex and love addiction.
Uh-huh.
I've had, and I have other guests coming on and have been on from my community, and, I it that's what it comes down to, community, and I'm saying
Yes.
this for anyone too who feels like, "I don't make friends easily," or, "How do I meet people in a new city?" And I know it's hard. Some people aren't as social maybe as we are, or it's, like, extroverted, but I found, because I was a music booker, it was my music community,
Mm.
the live music community. I met hundreds and hundreds of people who I call dear friends to this day. My dad said, "They're not your real friends." I'm like, "No, they're my real friends."
Mm.
We've seen each other over 20 years
Mm.
and watched each other grow. And the 12-step community and my acting community, because I'm a voice actor, but also I worked in casting. So it's about getting involved in, like, whatever your thing is. Even if it's, like, a quiet little knitting circle, do it. Like, get out of the
Absolutely.
house, even if it's to meditate and not speak to anybody. It becomes a family, whether it's a and I'm in yoga community too. So I think that's so important, and I love that you touched on men especially because women tend to do this very easily.
Yeah.
We open up, we bare our souls, we talk about our feelings with each other, we meet women in restrooms in public, and suddenly we have their phone number and we know about their ex-boyfriend, and we, can we're very we easily connect most, I mean, generally. And the way I found you was that someone had posted, like, what's the most bingeable show? And you said, like, Queer Eye is a real sob or something. And I had just done a whole sob fest around that. I love that show. It makes me cry. And I was like, who is this burly man that is so sweet and gentle? And I think there needs to be that vulnerability
Mm.
because a lot of men, at least in our generation, and I think you're younger than me, but, like, we just it wasn't
I don't
talked
know
about
about
as
that.
much. We'll see.
I'm 48, so
Okay, you're younger than me. You're younger than
okay.
me,
Well,
just by a little, just by a
well,
little. But I'm like,
you certainly look young, that's for sure.
"Thank you." Thank you. It's a yeah. I I
Yes,
I
but
know I could tell
yes,
we're the
so
same
true.
generation, and I'm like,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's really like in our generation, it was a lot of guys were told, "Don't cry, don't show your feelings." Depends on the family, but I know a lot of men that experience that, and so I'd love to hear you talk about that and kind of how you work with other men
Yeah,
to cultivate that vulnerability and, like, being able to hug each other and say, "I love you," and, open up vulnerably without shame. I just
yeah,
love that.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's so much there. What has been normalized inside of our culture with respect to the way in which men relate to each other is, for the most part, incredibly dysfunctional. And um, yeah, there's such a there has historically been such a stereotype around vulnerability and vulnerability equating to weakness, which is ironically exactly the opposite. Um, it is the weak who think that they cannot expose parts of themselves out of fear of judgment or shame or whatever. And that creates a weakness in a man's system. It creates a weakness in anyone's system to believe that they cannot be transparent about themselves. The degree to which one feels like they have to put a guard up is the degree to which they are defending an ego construct that isn't their true self. It isn't their authentic self. It's their persona that they've learned to walk around the world with. And lots of people walk around the world believing that they are their persona versus recognizing their authentic self. The journey to recognizing one's authentic self is a it is a vulnerable journey. Let's just put it that way. It's par for the course that there is vulnerability in that process, that in going through recognizing one's authentic self. And most men are just not trained to recognize what is the difference between their persona and what they think they need to defend in order to, say, fit in with the workplace or whatever, and what is their authentic self. They might say, well, I'm honest. I'm a perfectly honest person. I don't lie about anything. So how am I not authentic? Well, that's not what I'm talking about. It's not about honesty from the level of a relative statement of honest versus dishonest. That has nothing to do with it. It's authenticity is something that is a deeper connection that can only be discovered through recognizing and becoming transparent around others and letting yourself be seen and reflected and learning to do that not just once and not just twice, but learning to do that on a regular basis because the mind will habituate itself around patterns of inauthenticity so easily just to sort of become lazy, you know? And so I really encourage the men that I work with, whether that's my private clients, whether that's group coaching experiences that I do, whatever it is, I really, really encourage them and practically demand of them to really let down the guard of persona and really connect on that deeper level because life isn't really it's not the same when you are operating strictly from a persona and not connecting to that authentic expression of yourself.
That's why we cry at Queer Eye for the Straight Guy,
That's right.
because it touches my heart when I see these, like, Southern bearded straight guys and this whole bunch of effeminate men come in, and at first he's all tough, and then they don't just make him over, but they also break him down and say, "What's this really about? What are you really feeling?" And then they start weeping, and then they hug. It's like the most beautiful it's such a beautiful thing to see, is to see people's walls come down, and I think that's why it touches us so
Absolutely.
much. Is like, they're opening their hearts, and they're letting go of any biases, and they're like, it's just so beautiful. Um,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
it's so interesting too that that is facilitated by what we might call the sacred feminine energy that the Queer Eye cast are embodying,
yeah.
because they're really embodying when I say sacred feminine, the context that I'm using that in is the ability to feel and receive.
Mm.
They've cultivated inside of themselves a stronger ability to feel and receive than most men are accustomed to. And when I say sacred feminine, I am also being very much inclusive of even the most masculine oriented men. Oh, I'm a very masculine oriented man, and I have a strong relationship with the sacred feminine as it exists inside of me, with respect to being able to feel and being able to sense and to be able to be open and vulnerable and connect. And um, and that's there's nothing that is not implied. We have this historical context around feminine implying woman, masculine implying man, but they really have nothing to do with each other. We all have access to the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, and the cast in Queer Eye is more cultivated in their relationship with the sacred feminine due to their sexual orientation that then allows them to have that type of impact on other people. And so I think it's really important to recognize exactly what that is all about, and especially when this comes to men, because there tends to be this phobia and this stereotype that a lot of masculine men still hold with respect to femininity, not realizing that femininity at its core level, when it's taken away from the context of gender and recognized for its core essence, is the most valuable thing that we can learn to get in relationship with.
That's so beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I think that's why so many women love their gays, because they love their gay friends, because
Yeah.
it's like, "Oh, you're a man," and yet it's this emotional bond. I
That's right.
always tell my gay best friend, I'm like, "You're like my husband, my non-sexual husband, where we can gab all night and have tea and be on the couch and we watch weird, like, spiritual stuff." But
Mhm,
it's like
mhm.
it's such a beautiful relationship where that the sex is taken out of it, but we have this strong connection of love that's like family. It goes beyond. So I think that's so beautiful. And when you are working with clients, what are some of the reasons why people come to work with you?
Well, so many of the clients that I work with have recognized the limitations of what they were hoping to accomplish in their careers through what I would call externalized success. Whether that is being a doctor, being a lawyer, being and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who have sort of put all of their eggs in the basket of uh, experiencing fulfillment through the success of their businesses. And, we're kind of entrained that way uh, from early childhood. There's this sort of unconscious programming that we all receive that's related to, when I get done with kindergarten, then I go to first grade. When I get done to first grade, I go to second grade, and then I'll go to high school, and then I'll go to college, and then I'll go to get my PhD maybe or whatever, and then I'll get a job, and that relationship will give me the happy life that I'm looking for with the cars and the houses and so forth. And for those who, for some, that may be all that they want. And it may satisfy their all the longings that they have. My experience has been otherwise. My experience has suggested that most people, once they accomplish the worldly things that they have wanted to accomplish, find themselves at some point in their lives really struggling with feeling like, wait a minute, this doesn't add up to what I was thinking it was going to add up to. In fact, I've sacrificed so much in my life, and I don't feel like I'm really any better off for it in a certain way. I might be comfortable and safe, but I don't really, there's something missing. There's something deeper missing. And so where I come in is to help remind them and connect them to what is deeper, and to help them to go beneath the surface level of success that they've grown accustomed to and recognize deeper potentials that come from connecting to an authentic, deeper relationship with themselves. And maybe that's a creative relationship that they've never explored. Or maybe that is related to challenges inside of their relationship with their spouse and their family that is a byproduct of ignoring a deeper calling inside of themselves. So, my job is to help them to uncover those deeper callings and recognize that and step into that on a deeper level.
That's really I relate with that so much having grown up in a sort of waspy environment in Connecticut, and
Oh,
it was all
I grew up in Maine, so yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yes, exactly, Westport, I've been
yeah.
yes, we're yes, it's that very East Coast, and my family, I don't wanna say my parents are like that because my parents are they've done the traditional thing, but they're not stuffy or anything. It's not like, um, from 48 Hours, and she stepped on the ball. I don't know if you know that reference, but it's a 48 Hours movie reference where it's just everyone I went to school with. It was like overachievers. It was athlete. It's like you go to school, you go to or boarding school, you go into college and you go to an Ivy League school and then you get a great job on like Wall Street or something. And even just the school system was just very regimented. Like I don't think I really learned the way that I learn. I mean, I wasn't I was a great student because I wanted to not to please my parents, but I wasn't that academically inclined. I'm more creative and more bright, and I think we get so accustomed to being told, like, "This is how you're supposed to do things." And some of us just don't fit in that box. And even today, I mean, my whole life I've struggled financially and had great years of abundance doing creative work, being an actor and things like that. But there was this belief I had that, well, if I don't become a lawyer, then I'm not going to be a success. And if
Mm,
I, and so I did the thing I was supposed to do. And it took me until my 30s to start really doing what I wanted to do. I mean, it was
mm,
like, well, like, I should work in an office and I should work 9 to 5. And I wasn't thriving. I wasn't
yeah,
even making great money.
yeah,
So I love that it's like turning that up on its head and saying, "But what's your purpose? Why are you here? And
yeah,
what do you really want out of life? Forget the trajectory.
yeah.
What how can you thrive as a human being?"
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I so resonate with everything you just said. And I think I mean, right now, in particular, at this time that we're living in right now, there are tectonic shifts that are occurring inside of our culture that are happening more and more. And the thing that was supposed to be able to provide the success and fulfillment, that job might not even exist
Yeah.
in another year or two. And so when something is, especially when things can be disrupted like that, and you cannot rely on a particular job or title in order to ensure your safety and your, quote unquote, success in the material world, then it's really important to start looking at a deeper calling. Because if you don't, you haven't really established a deeper, I think I'm saying deeper plenty. I need another synonym. um, you haven't really established a sense of resilience that is born out of connecting to meaning and purpose in life. If if your purpose is tied to your job description and your job description is no longer going to exist in a year or two, well, that's a problem. That's a major problem. That means that it's time to start to look at something that is going to be able to handle these tectonic shifts as they're occurring inside of culture, that is going to be an inner GPS for you, that is going to have uh, it's going to be your compass, because the job could fall off and you could move to pivoting to something else because you have a relationship with a sense of internal meaning that wasn't predicated upon the job description to begin with. And I think more and more this is going to be happening inside of our world, is people are going to need to learn how to let go of identifying with a job description or a title, and to move with what feels right to them versus what is the logical thing that everyone says that you should do that is a guaranteed success.
That's so important. I was a successful voice actor. I still do voice acting, but then I developed a vocal disorder and I lost my voice for 2 years. I couldn't perform for 2 years. And that was a grief, and I wanna talk about this with you too, about
Mm-hmm.
grief specifically. But it was, "This is what I do, this is how I make my money, this is how what I do every day." And then I couldn't do it, and I could barely speak. I had spasmodic, like, spastic vocal cords and muscle tension dysphonia. So then when I recovered, which took like 3 years of vocal recovery, I come back to an industry that's completely changed. And now all of my friends are going, "What happened to our careers? We used to make 6 figures." It was like a I remember one of my coaches saying, "Oh, it's like a, slot machine." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I just do 10 auditions. I know I'm gonna get 3 of them." And it was like every day I had like 3 jobs, and I was stressing myself out, but I loved it, and I was making a lot of money. And then it's not what it used to be. And I'm not giving up, I'm still doing it, but it forced me to look inside myself, and that's what led me to into the world of spirituality. That's what led me to starting a podcast once I could speak normally about near-death experiences. It's what led me to studying mediumship and becoming a professional psychic medium, which never would I have imagined would be my path, but I felt like it was actually what doing this is like my passion. I mean, connecting with people, hearing their stories, sharing their stories, and working with people one on one, as I assume you do too. It's this like deeper connection. There's the deeper, but it's this deeper connection and intimacy in the work that we do. So it's creating abundance in helping other people on their own path and helping them heal. And ultimately, my goal is to help people also recover from addiction as well, and find self-esteem. So it's that work that we're doing that it's not that I don't love acting, I love it, but I had to find that that's not really my true purpose here. I'm good at it, but that's not really who I am and what I have to offer the world.
It's on a personal level, it's so interesting that you're mentioning all of this because one of my clients last year was a voice actor, a woman who is a voice actor with the exact same condition that you just described.
I may know her. We'll have to see if we know each other later. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I'd be
yeah,
happy to. I made
that's
some
fun.
friends who came to me and said, "I have it too, but I'm not telling anyone because I don't want to lose work." And
Mm,
we ended up bonding over it because it's
mm,
so common. And
yeah.
along those lines, this is what I was going to ask you about is when it happened, I kept saying thank you for the rest of my body. Thank you. I could still move because I'm I'm active, but I was so devastated because it was like what I loved to do. It was how I made my living, and it also was a career that took a long, long, long time to thrive in. It took being the babysitter, the caterer, the driving for Lyft, the to get there,
Mhm,
and all the classes and workshops, and finally I made it, and then I lost it. And
mm,
so I went through what I didn't recognize at the time as a grief. I
mm,
fell apart, and I just remember my partner at the time just didn't understand. And I one day was in my recording booth screaming, punching the walls, and he's like, "You need to get your shit together." He was like, "You need to find something else to do. You can't talk about this all the time. You've got to let it go."
mm,
And
mm,
I understand he didn't understand,
mm,
but I now understand that I was in grief. That's
mm,
what that was. So
mm.
along the lines of the
And
grief that
fear,
and
and
fear,
fear,
because we think,
massive
yes,
fear. Yeah.
massive, and we think grief is just when somebody dies. But sometimes it can be grieving a chapter of our lives. It can be grieving, like you said, like the loss of your mobility. It can be grieving who you thought you were. So I'd love to
Mm.
hear you just sort of, I guess, riff on that and also kind of talk about what helped you, even though I know it's an endless grief is never ending, right? But it's like along your journey, what have you learned the most about healing from grief?
Oh, such a great question, and so important. And what you're speaking to with respect to the mixture between grief and fear is a powerful one. We don't tend to put those two together, but in so many respects, they are sort of cousins. If you're grieving the loss of a loved one, you might also be fearing who you are going to be without them in your life on some level. Or if you're grieving the loss, as I did, of the use of the lower half of my body, there's also the fear of who am I without that part of me, a whole 50% of my body functioning the way that most bodies do. And so there tends to be that relationship between grief and fear. And um, and they feed on each other. The fear feeds the grief, and the grief feeds the fear, and it just turns into this explosion of energy that we don't really know what to even do with because it really feels like part of us is dying. And the I suppose one thing that I've really gotten accustomed to doing, and it is a very regular part of the work that I do with clients, is to practice the letting go of who we believe ourselves to be on a regular basis. The samurai in their ancient practices, as you probably know, used to practice the art of death before going out onto the battlefield. And that way they could have total equanimity when they were on the battlefield. So they could be able to move without reacting to anything that felt like a threat because they had already died inside. And there's something about that practice of dying before you die so that you can keep living again and actually imagining yourself going through a death, because every grief, every point of grief is really a small death in the bigger context of what we'll eventually leave behind, which is actually the physical form, which will just be another death. And so practicing that and making that part of one's everyday life, so that when one grieves, one can realize, oh, I'm just dying to that self right now. But in that dying to that self, I will be reborn as something new. It just feels like that's all I have ever been and all I ever wanted to be. And it felt like that was an end result that I wanted to kind of really keep leaning into. But this is where the Buddhists say that all suffering emerges from attachment and desire. The desire and the attachment, the desire to be that self in perpetuity, or the attachment to that sense of identity in perpetuity. Nothing is ever going to last in perpetuity. So the things we cling to are creating the suffering, which then creates the grief when we let go of those attachments. But that process of moving through is terrifying and sad, very deeply sad as well.
Oh,
Very
that's
real, very
yeah.
real and important emotions to feel. And I think the key to going through that, and one that might not be able to feel it in the moment when it's happening, but if they can remember the words that we're talking about right now, you will be reborn into something fresh and new with new possibilities. It's what nature is doing, and so it's also what humans are doing, given the fact that we are inseparable from nature.
That is so true. The times in my life when I've not wanted to be here anymore, and I don't even know how I literally I feel like I stayed here for my parents. Like I always think, and so I'm very lucky because I always had something to come back to because I have a very close-knit family and I'm very lucky. So many people do not. I am so glad I stuck around because everything it's like what goes up must come down, but what comes down must come up. And I've only transformed through these experiences, and I always say thank God I stuck around and I didn't give up because I wouldn't have had this beautiful experience. I wouldn't have had the growth that I had, and like I never knew who I was going to become. I couldn't picture myself, as you said, a different way. I couldn't picture myself not a voice actor. And I'm grateful now that I'm both a voice actor now and um a medium and a podcast host. And now I'm doing it all, but I felt like sort of like the universe, God, whatever you feel comfortable saying, was directing me away from that. Like, you're an actor, but you've got something more meaningful to do. And I was pissed. And I'm
Yeah.
sure, you're like, but this. So my last sort of big question for you is, this is a tough one. Maybe it's not for you. Do you wish this had never happened? Or is it like if you could take it back and if there was some way that you could change what happened to you, would you change it? I guess that's where I'll
it's always an interesting question. It's something that I've mulled over a number of times. Um, and I mean, it's undeniable, really, that the experience that I've had in my life, the most traumatizing experience that I had to transform, has been a catalyst for so much in my own life and with everyone that I've touched and worked with. And so taking the lens, I think everything comes down to perspective. If I take the perspective or the lens that God wants to work through creating valuable, transformative experiences to help others to move through painful circumstances and come out the other side, more deeply embodied, more present to their own truth, to the truth of the divine, etc. If I take that perspective, then it's undeniable that my life and my circumstances, exactly as they have happened, have had tremendous value. And so, if I look at that as being sort of the currency of the divine, and if I want to work as someone who works to let go of my own personal agenda as much as possible and be here in a way to be of service to that deeper calling from the divine, then it's undeniable that everything that I've gone through has served and continues to serve and will continue to serve for the rest of my life in a powerful, meaningful way. That being said, sure, it would be a whole lot easier, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that given who I was and the journey that I signed up for, I probably would have found some way or another to get my own ass kicked in life. So I don't think
Right.
there, I think probably my soul decided for a challenging experience one way or the other. So this is the
Yeah.
one that it chose.
Oh my gosh, you said that so well because I never tell people it happened for a reason or I mean, I'd never say that to somebody, but I think the way you said that is in a sense it's not so much it's not that simple. It's I believe our souls choose our challenges, but not everybody believes that. But apart from that, it's okay, well, I wish this didn't happen, but as long as it did, what positive can come out of it? Or what positive it's look, it could have never happened and you'd have just a different life. It doesn't mean you still wouldn't have gone on to do wonderful things and had
That's right.
wonderful connections and met other great people. And but it's as long as this happened, it's that again, the Buddhism thing of this is what's happening. So let's I can't say make the best of it. That sounds too trite, but it's like, what can we do to heal ourselves and in the process also be of service to others when we're healed enough to do that? So I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful lesson. And I'm just so happy I found you. I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew it. I was like, I feel so drawn to this person for like no reason, but I believe there was a reason. And when I saw that what you do and that I was like, this is the type of person I want to know, but this is the type of person I want to interview. And I'm so glad you said yes to sharing your story because I know that once this podcast grows and we get your story out there, I know that there are already many people who know of you, but I'm just excited to share everything that you said in hopes that other people can find hope and inspiration and hang in there because life is a journey and it's really difficult, but it's also so beautiful.
It surely is. So, anyone who's listening, subscribe to Shannon's podcast and share it with people so that it can get out there. It's been
Thank
such
you.
a wonderful experience getting to chat with you and to
You too.
connect and resonate at such a deep level.
Yes, very I agree with you 100%, and I also just wanted to shout out that you are a according to your website, there's a reality show in the works, there is a book in the works. Um, I'm so excited to see where that goes. Can you just tell us a little bit about that
Mm.
so people can follow
Yeah.
you? And, it's and your Instagram too is Zen Warrior Training, is that what it's under?
Yep. At
And
Zen Warrior Training,
your podcast I mean, and your, website is zenwarriortraining.com, and I'll
zenwarriortraining.com.
have the links
Mhm.
below, but tell
Mhm.
us about that real quick.
Yeah, yeah. So the reality show, it's more technically a docu-series, which will be
I love that.
about the world's most highly accomplished disabled outdoor adventure leaders leading groups of individuals who share the same disability on the adventure of a lifetime. So that's called
I'm
Beyond
so
Limits.
beyond limits, I'm so
Yeah.
in for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. Yeah.
yeah,
So we are working on getting that out there and finding a studio that wants to produce it.
amazing.
And like you said, I'm also working on a novel right now, along with Mark Victor Hansen's publishing company.
Good for you.
And I have a number of other things in the works too. I'm creating an enlightened caregiving course for individuals who have found themselves in a sudden overnight care situation where a loved one of theirs is needing their care and attention. So, how to approach caregiving from an enlightened perspective as to avoid caregiver overwhelm, which is so common in the
So
world. So
important.
that's another project I'm working on right now.
You're amazing. You're such a beautiful human, and I'm so glad we met. Thank you, Sam Morris with Zen Warrior Training, for joining me today. I look forward to
Thank you,
seeing
Shannon.
what else you accomplish.
It's been
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure connecting with you.
Likewise.